The day Blake Winslow announced his engagement, reporters practically shoved their microphones into my face, cornering me with the same question over and over. How did I feel about it? Blake. A Winslow. The kind of family that sits at the very top of New York's Upper East Side food chain. Those 8 years I spent with him? In everyone else's eyes, they were nothing but a joke. His mother, Mrs. Winslow, eternally wrapped in pearls, always introduced me in that polite, distant tone people reserve for hired help. That acting girl, she'd say, as if I were someone passing through their house, not someone in his life. The men in his circle were worse. Behind my back, they'd nudge him and laugh. She's just a minor celebrity. Have your fun, but don't get serious. And Blake himself? He'd flick his lighter open and shut, smoke curling around his face, smiling like none of it mattered. Relax, he once said. It's not like I'm actually going to marry her. Now, under the strobing flash of cameras, I adjusted my expression and spoke carefully. We're not very close, I said slowly. But it's a good thing. I wish him a happy engagement. The clip went viral within hours. Word was, Blake saw it and immediately boarded his private jet, flying straight back to Manhattan from JFK that same night. By the time I lifted the trophy for Best Actress, the highest honor our industry gives, news of Blake's engagement was already flooding the entire country. Every headline on my phone screamed about a powerful family alliance. And yet, there wasn't a single photo from the engagement itself. The Winslows had done what they always did, sealed it behind airtight privacy. In their world, privacy wasn't modesty. It was power. That didn't stop the public from wanting more. For 8 years, after all, Blake Winslow had existed in tabloids under a convenient alias, the mysterious backer behind Nora Lane. Thanks to me, he'd hovered at the edges of gossip pages, half seen, half denied. People loved the contrast. Old money and a girl from the screen. They mocked the gap between us, waiting eagerly for the moment I'd finally fall. Nora, is it true you met Mr. Winslow when you were 18? Nora, after all these years, why didn't it work out? Was it because the Winslow family doesn't accept people from the entertainment world? Did he choose today to announce his engagement just to humiliate you? Have you broken up? Was it because of that rumor from 2 weeks ago? My gaze drifted across their feverish faces. Their eyes weren't just curious, they were hungry, like they wanted to peel back my skin and dig out something uglier, bloodier. Blake, is he really engaged today? I fixed my face into the flawless Hollywood-approved smile and looked straight into the lens. The Winslow gentleman you keep mentioning and I are truly not close, I said. But an engagement is a happy milestone in anyone's life. I wish him well. Then, as if daring fate itself, I repeated it, slowly, clearly, so no one could mishear. Happy engagement, Mr. Winslow. They pounced on every twitch of my face, dissecting my expression like detectives, convinced there had to be a tragic story hiding underneath, the discarded woman, the fallen mistress. I handed my phone back to my agent, Sarah. She looked at me, worry written all over her face. Everyone online is saying you got dumped by a Winslow, she said quietly. Even with the award, this could hurt your fashion deals, your investments. I don't really understand that world, but in New York, nobody messes with the Winslow family. She hesitated, then added, if someone like him decides to blacklist you, even an Oscar-level win won't save you. I felt drained. Sarah, I said softly, don't worry so much. I won't drag you down. She smiled awkwardly, lips parting as if she wanted to say more. In the end, she said nothing. No one ever believed it, that for those 8 years, we were just like countless ordinary couples in this world. We drifted from flirtation into desire, from inseparable passion into something shattered beyond repair. Blake had eyes that were cold and distant. When those eyes settled on you, even for a second, you felt yourself shrink, reduced to dust. It wasn't arrogance, not really. It was simply how he was born. That kind of indifference came from generations of accumulated wealth, a calm detachment from everything and everyone, as if the world itself barely registered. The first time I looked into those eyes, a question surfaced instinctively. In a city as loud and crowded as New York, in this marketplace of fame and ambition, how much sincerity could someone so far removed from it all truly possess? It was 2012. From January to December, people whispered about the Mayan prophecy of the end of the world. Taylor Swift's songs spilled out of every shop and car radio. Youth films set campuses on fire, convincing everyone that love was fearless and unstoppable. I was 18, maybe 19, studying at NYU's Tisch School of the Arts. That age was reckless and intense, fearless in the dumbest way, an age where you truly believed love could leap across class divides without consequence. And it was during that time that I met Blake. Back then I juggled everything at once, classes during the day, shifts at a restaurant, and endless auditions I had to fight my way into, one after another. When that so-called independent producer slapped his rough hand down on my thigh, I shot up without thinking and smashed my bag straight into his head. I yanked the door open and ran, hearing him roar behind me, "You bitch, stop her." I screamed and struggled, utterly humiliated, when a slightly hoarse voice cut through the chaos. "Hey," it said calmly, "she doesn't want it. Didn't you hear?" The man's voice was almost lazy, barely raised, and yet it worked instantly. He glanced at me, just briefly. There was no warmth in his eyes. It was like he'd seen a stray dog being kicked on the street and in a moment of mild goodwill, decided to say something. He leaned against the hallway window, elbows braced behind him, posture loose and unbothered. A breeze from the park outside lifted his dark hair. His white shirt was undone at the collar, sleeves rolled up, a watch visible at his wrist. The cigarette between his fingers glowed and dimmed. The people who'd chased after me froze when they saw him, then bolted like they'd seen a ghost. I clutched my bag to my chest and bowed deeply, thanking him with all the sincerity I had. Then I heard him laugh softly. He glanced out the window, crushed the cigarette, and asked in a casual drawl, "You study acting?" "Which school?" "Tisch. NYU." He nodded, as if it barely mattered. "They're gone. You can head back." The first time I met Blake, he was so understated it never crossed my mind to question who he really was. Later, I learned the truth. When some people reach a certain level, they no longer need logos or symbols to announce themselves. Their restraint is the real signal. They look more low-key than anyone else. When we were together, we avoided the topic of background entirely. For Blake, it was just a game with someone outside his world, nothing that required explanation. For me, it was simply about enjoying the moment while it lasted. There was one time at a private party hosted by his friends, that his only friend who ever treated me decently, Caleb, had too much aged whiskey and accidentally let slip a last name. I didn't think much of it then. It felt distant, irrelevant, like something from another universe. Only later did I understand. That so-called politeness wasn't kindness at all. It was a warning. A reminder that Blake and I belonged to entirely different worlds. Unfortunately, I was too young, too headstrong to hear it. I ignored every hint, every signal, and wasted years on him before I finally learned. After the award ceremony, the obligatory celebrations were unavoidable. Slightly drunk, I emerged from the hotel's underground garage, waved off the driver, and went upstairs to my apartment alone. As the elevator rose, I studied my reflection in the mirrored wall. Tonight was supposed to be the proudest moment of my life. I should have been exhilarated, glowing, overwhelmed with joy. Instead, a memory surfaced. I vaguely remembered the night I'd lost a tiny, almost laughably insignificant indie film award and cried so hard I couldn't breathe. Blake had sighed then, pulled me close, and murmured with practiced gentleness, "It's just some unknown festival. It doesn't matter. One day you'll win an Oscar, and we'll shut all those blind idiots up. Stop crying, okay?" That only made me cry harder. I'd looked at him through tears and asked, uncertain and afraid, "Do you really think I can win something big? I can't even land a decent supporting role. When would I ever be Best Actress? You're just comforting me again." He'd smiled, completely assured. "Our Nora is incredible. If you don't believe in yourself, at least believe in me. When has Blake Winslow ever lied to you?" I'd clung to his waist, wiping all my tears onto his custom-made dress shirt. He'd pinched the bridge of his nose, helpless, not daring to scold me. After showering, I collapsed onto the oversized sofa, phone in hand, replying one by one to the congratulatory messages flooding in. My thumb stopped at a familiar name. The last message was still from half a month ago. That was when everything had finally exploded. Exhausted beyond words, sitting in the passenger seat of his sports car, I'd said calmly, "Let's break up, Blake." His hands had tightened around the steering wheel, knuckles white. "Not happening," he'd snapped. Don't even think about it. I'd smiled, softly, cruelly. I've already humiliated you this much. You still want to keep going? He turned to me sharply, breathing heavy. After a few seconds, he forced himself to calm down. Nora, what are you doing now? The company's in the middle of a major acquisition. I'm exhausted. Just give me some time. The argument ended badly. Neither of us was willing to be the one who backed down. Now, the doorbell rang. At the same time, my phone rang. Same person. I sat there, unmoved, letting both ring endlessly. Until the doorknob turned. Only then did I remember, I'd never changed the passcode. It was still his birthday. I remained seated, looking toward the entryway. Blake stood there, travel-worn, dust still clinging to him, his gaze heavy as it settled on me. Eyes are organs of desire. His had once been cold, empty of everything else. I was the one who dragged him down into the mortal world, and then left him struggling alone in that sea of wanting. I was calmer than I'd expected. Some things, perhaps, had reached the point where they needed to be resolved. So, I asked evenly, you flew in from the East Coast this late? He stopped in front of me, blocking most of the light. His shirt was wrinkled, sleeves still rolled up. After a moment, he sat down and rested his head lightly on my shoulder. He seemed utterly exhausted. He sighed. What are you making a fuss about? How much of that was real feeling, how much was habit, I couldn't tell anymore. Blake, couldn't you see it yet? This game was already approaching its end. I looked at him calmly. Are you planning to finish your family marriage first, then keep me as your secret lover? Like those old-fashioned arrangements people in your circle are so fond of. Blake, I said quietly, don't humiliate me like this. Please. He froze for a second, then said after a long pause, give me some time. Things are complicated right now. I cut him off. We've tried, haven't we? Blake, I tried. And all I got was bloodied and broken. Do you really need to drag me into one more wall before you're satisfied? My gaze dropped to his ring finger. I spoke with genuine sincerity. The new ring looks nice. His hand stiffened instantly, completely still. I lifted my head and smiled at him, just like the first time we met. So, I said gently, can you give me back the ring I gave you? What a shame it was, how the most intense love of our youth could end in nothing but mutual disappointment. The second time I saw Blake, I was 18. It was at a school gala, the kind where people were always short one partner, and I'd been pulled in at the last minute to fill a ceremonial role. I thought it would be nothing more than another passing encounter. I had no idea it would be the beginning of so much entanglement. I was wearing a pure white evening gown, standing alone on the terrace, waiting. I don't know if he'd been there all along or arrived later. He leaned against the railing, a cigarette between his fingers, and called out lazily, "Little Swan." I turned my head. The moment I saw it was him, something flickered in my eyes, an uncontrollable spark. He chuckled under his breath. Didn't get it wrong. It really is you. I stepped closer, curious despite myself. Why are you here? He lowered his head slightly. The night breeze carried the clean, crisp scent of cedar from his clothes. Just bored, he said lightly. Wandering around. Ended up here. It sounded like he was coaxing a child. I didn't bother to challenge it. Then he kept teasing, insisting I owe him a meal, calling it repayment for saving me, fair and square. I was already prepared. I planned to use every dollar I'd earned from part-time jobs to treat him. He looked expensive in a way I couldn't explain, and I simply couldn't imagine him sitting inside a greasy, cheap pizza joint, that jarring sense of mismatch. But his steps twisted and turned, and in the end, he brought me to a 24-hour diner near campus. He barely ate. After a few bites, he put down his fork and knife, then explained casually that his stomach wasn't great, he couldn't handle much food. At the time, I thought he was just trying to spare my feelings. Only later, after we were together, did I realize his stomach really had been ruined by that high-pressure life. When we were together, I learned all kinds of gentle recipes just for him. Whenever his ulcers flared up and he broke out in cold sweat from the pain, I hovered around him day and night, terrified he might shatter if I looked away. He would be half reclined on the bed, face pale, pinching my cheek with a faint smile. Look at how nervous you are, he'd joke. Anyone who didn't know better would think I'm dying of cancer. I'd get so angry I'd slap him, grab the tray, and storm downstairs without looking back. Blake controlled several startup tech companies, practice projects handed to him by his family. Back then, he was like most founders, burning himself alive just to keep going. I once believed he was just someone living off a modest family trust, trying to build something on his own. I even felt secretly pleased, thinking that if I worked harder, the gap between us wouldn't be that wide. Somehow, after back and forth, there was always a reason to talk, another excuse to meet. By the time I realized it, Blake had already forced his way into my life. The first time I met his friends was at a members-only private club in Manhattan. I dressed carefully, wanting to make a good impression. When Blake saw me, he looked momentarily surprised. Only after we arrived did I understand why. One private room. The men were his friends. The women were the companions they brought along, mostly models or minor actresses. His friends treated my presence beside Blake as entirely unremarkable. They glanced up once, then waved him over, as if I barely existed. Sometimes, you realize that to make someone uneasy in a crowd, you don't need to insult her or push her down. Ignoring her is far more effective. That faint, appraising glance from another class, that cool indifference, it's enough to make your scalp prickle. Clearly, Blake had no intention of formally introducing me. To everyone else, and perhaps to him, I was just another piece of entertainment for the evening. When you're young, pride runs high. If he didn't value me, I wanted to force him to notice. His friends were playing Texas Hold'em. I picked up a stack of chips and said casually, "All in." The other player froze for a moment, then the game only grew more intense. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught sight of Blake lighting a cigarette, glancing over again and again. I acted as if I didn't notice. Across the table, I parried every move effortlessly, giving and taking, never rushing, never retreating. Before long, the leather seat beside me sank. Blake slid in close, looping an arm around my waist in an unmistakably possessive gesture. "What are you playing?" he asked, amused, "having this much fun?" I was slightly drunk by then, one hand braced against the arm of the sofa. I curved my eyes into a smile and looked up at him. The first time I ever watched the sunrise over the Empire State Building in New York, Blake was the one with me. I'd said I wanted to see the sunrise. He'd been utterly baffled, laughing as he asked what there was to see. But New York was new to me. College was my first time in this city. Everything felt fresh, worth staring at. That night, we stayed up until morning just for that sunrise. He leaned against the observation deck railing, watching me tilt my head back toward the glowing horizon, the first light of dawn spilling across the sky. After that, word began to circulate in his circle. People said the cold-blooded Winslow heir had finally found himself a little ancestor to worship. It started at a poker game. Halfway through the night, Blake was losing badly, so badly it was almost painful to watch. I was sitting beside him then, one hand caught in his grip, forced to follow the game carefully along with him. He clicked his tongue, stood up, and pressed me down into his seat. "This is boring," he said. "Let our little queen play." I eagerly reached for the cards. Blake stepped aside to smoke, patting my head before he left. "Play however you want," he said lightly. "If you lose, it's on me." The young man across the table glanced at me, smiling. "What's your name?" I looked up at him. His peach blossom eyes were full of practiced charm. I knew who he was, Caleb, the notorious playboy of their circle. Blake once said his family owned half of Connecticut in real estate. I tossed out a chip and smiled back. "Nora. And you?" "Caleb. Call me Cal," he said smoothly. "Come play with us more often." That night, I didn't just win back everything Blake had lost, I walked away the biggest winner at the table. Caleb insisted on a final showdown until dawn, until Blake dragged him away, laughing and cursing him out. That same year, New York was hit by a freak hurricane, Hurricane Sandy, I think. One night, the taxi I was in got trapped in a low-lying part of downtown. Rainwater flooded the street, the engine stalled, and we were completely stuck. Blake's voice came through the phone. His tone was usually calm, almost detached, but this time there was panic pressed tightly beneath it. For half an hour, the driver and I tried to reassure each other, watching the water rise inch by inch. The sky went completely dark. Power went out across the neighborhood. My phone, drained of battery, finally went silent. Then, a massive black SUV tore through the floodwater like a steel beast. Its heavy engine roared louder than the thunder, waves exploding up to half the height of the hood. The vehicle stopped beside the taxi. The driver's window rolled down, revealing Blake's sharp profile. The taxi driver stared, stunned. I shoved the door open and climbed out as rain continued to pour in sheets. Blake didn't bother with an umbrella. He jumped straight into the murky water, reached out, and hauled me into his arms in one swift motion, then shoved me into his car. He set me in the passenger seat, turned to look at me and roughly, yet somehow gently, swiped his hand across my face, wiping away tears mixed with rain. "Stop crying," he said, voice low and firm. "I'm here now, aren't I?" One hand gripped the steering wheel. He slammed down on the gas. The SUV roared forward, bursting free from the flooded streets. That night, word spread through certain circles that the Winslow heir had risked his life, charging straight into the center of a hurricane, for a student from the Tisch School of the Arts. It caused more of a stir than anyone expected. Caleb was skiing in Switzerland at the time. He sent me a message to check in, and at the end added a warning. "This got too loud. Blake's mother has heard a few things. Don't worry, she doesn't have the time to deal with trivial matters right now." Later, I realized it wasn't that she didn't have the time. It was that, from a place of class arrogance, she didn't consider someone like me a threat at all. After all, at Blake's side, beautiful faces came and went. I was never the first. Later still, the news reached me through Caleb. Blake hadn't invited me, which in itself proved it wasn't a gathering I was meant to be part of. But I went anyway. The location was a private villa in the Hamptons. When I pushed the door open, the woman beside Blake had her clothes half undone, her body practically pressed against his. The moment I walked in, the noisy party fell into a brief, unmistakable silence. Blake stood up and came toward me, touching the bridge of his nose awkwardly. "Why are you here?" "I didn't touch her." He hadn't touched her. He just hadn't pushed her away. Maybe my expression was unbearable to look at, because Blake suddenly turned around and kicked the coffee table in front of him, hard. Bottles shattered across the floor. It was the first time I'd ever seen him lose control, the first time I'd seen him that angry. "Who the hell called her here?" I saw Caleb lift his eyes lazily, then kick the young man next to him straight out of the room. The man immediately caught on. "Blake, I just haven't seen Nora in a long time, so I thought." Blake looked at him coldly. "When did she ever get close to you?" In their world, social relationships radiated outward from the core figures. The Winslow family was deeply tied to other old money families. Blake and Caleb's friendship couldn't fracture over something like this. When blame needed to be assigned, someone lower down was always willing to step forward and take the hit. That night, on the drive back, Blake and I finally erupted into a full-blown argument. He leaned sideways, one arm braced against the car window. The radio was playing Lana Del Rey's Young and Beautiful, the lyrics asking, "Will you still love me when I'm no longer young and beautiful?" The irony was almost cruel. Blake said calmly, "Nora, you can want anything from me, money, resources, connections, whatever you like. But don't expect feelings from someone like me. It's not worth it." But when has anyone ever been able to calculate whether feelings are worth it or not? Sometimes you have to admit it. Love, when it's too full, can be frightening. Some goodbyes don't need a formal goodbye. Fading out of someone's life can be as simple as no longer replying to messages. My life slipped back into its usual rhythm. Everything looked the same as before, except I was no longer restless every day, no longer counting hours just to see him. Until one afternoon, I stepped out of the academic building and saw him at a glance, lounging against a stone pillar nearby, drawing curious looks from passing students. His tone was calm. There was no trace of the fight from half a month ago, no hint of the weeks of silence between us. It felt as if we'd only said good night yesterday and run into each other again today. "Class over?" he asked. "Want to grab something to eat?" Without waiting, he took my backpack from my hands and laced his fingers through mine. "Have some mercy on me. I've been on a business trip in London for over 2 weeks. I came straight here from the airport. If I don't eat soon, my stomach's going to revolt again." And so, without anyone deliberately resisting, without anyone deliberately bringing anything up, we drifted back together, just like that. I let myself sink into it, rise and fall with him, thinking that at worst I'd trade a few years of youth. Surely, if we kept at it long enough, we'd grind our way to some kind of ending. Looking back now, I can admit it plainly, I was naive. My acting career was never smooth. In Hollywood, where there are far more hopefuls than opportunities, what matters sometimes isn't talent at all, but how solid the capital behind you is. When I auditioned for a period historical drama, I landed nothing more than a maid's role. Still, compared to before, at least it meant a face on screen and a few lines to speak. The production had been marketed as a prestige project from the start. The female lead was a top-tier A-list star, the male lead, an actor with multiple major awards. So even a servant role drew hundreds of auditioning actresses. By the time it was my turn, the California sun at noon was vicious, baking the pavement. I was restless and uneasy. Blake had finally cleared a rare free weekend to be with me, and I dragged him here to suffer through the heat. After the audition, I hurried straight to the parking lot. Blake was standing alone under the shade of a tree, sunglasses on. When he saw me, he twisted open a bottle of water and handed it to me. "Why are you running? It's scorching out here." I felt a knot in my chest. If I'd known, I wouldn't have made you come. The truth was, he had tested me before. Once when we were tangled together, he joked half seriously, "Nora, kiss me right here, and Blake will give you anything." Dazed, I brushed my lips against his and asked foolishly, "Anything?" He kissed me back and murmured, "The lead role in Martin Scorsese's next film. It's not cast yet. I can make a call." I sobered instantly. A director of that caliber, how many people were clawing for even a single chance? And yet Blake said it so lightly. "One kiss, and it's yours." I clenched the sheets and hugged him. "You're shortening my lifespan like this. That director is a legend. I don't have popularity, I don't have name recognition. You just be pushing me out there to get torn apart by the entire internet." He laughed softly. We both understood. After that, he never mentioned that kind of deal so bluntly again. At the end of 2012, everyone was obsessing over that ridiculous so-called doomsday. And then the day passed, and nothing happened. People collapsed asleep during the New Year celebration in Times Square. When they woke up, the first sunlight of 2013 was already spilling over Manhattan. And after the end of the world that never came, Nora and Blake fell deeply in love. They loved each other seriously, recklessly, without holding back. Flying from New York to my family home in New Jersey wasn't far, but on a holiday like that, it wasn't easy either. When Blake's message popped up on my phone, it was around 3 in the morning. I threw off the covers, sat up, and stared blankly at the screen. The next second, I was racing downstairs like a madwoman, still careful enough to close the door with the softest click. It was the stretch between Christmas and New Year's. Houses along the street were draped in colored lights, street lamps casting pale yellow halos onto the snow. Blake's car was parked by the curb. That strange hesitation you feel when you're close to something precious washed over me. I stood on my side of the road for a long time, staring, until my eyes stung. Half a month earlier, winter break had started. He'd driven me to the airport, wrapped his scarf around my neck before security, and told me, "Go early. Come back early." I pulled open the car door and climbed straight across from the passenger seat, pressing my forehead against his. Why are you here?" Blake's voice was slightly hoarse, tinged with fatigue. He laughed softly. His tone was still cool, familiar, but something else had slipped into it. "I missed you." As he said it, I cupped his face and leaned down to kiss him. Blake tilted his head back instinctively, his right arm sliding around my waist, tightening just a little. Hidden in the shadows of the trees, inside that car, we kissed fiercely, forgetting time, forgetting everything else. At the stroke of midnight, the next second, fireworks exploded over the town square in the distance, countless bursts blooming at once, like a meteor shower swallowing the mundane world whole. The fireworks arrived without warning, brilliant and dizzying, lighting up the dark where desire had quietly taken root. Bathed in that dazzling glow, I opened my eyes and looked at Blake. Those brows and eyes that were usually so detached, so untouched by feeling, were stained now with something unmistakably human. Desire softened them, pulled them closer to earth. He looked devastatingly beautiful. When the kiss finally ended, I rested my forehead against his and listened to his ragged, almost torn breathing. I laughed softly. He reached behind him. After a brief rustling sound, he placed something heavy into my hands, a thick paper bag. "What's this?" I asked, lowering my head to peek inside. Dozens of thick white envelopes lay neatly stacked within. Blake leaned back against the seat. "A gift. My grandmother says kids need to hold cash in their hands to grow up safely." I reached in and pulled one out. Each envelope was stuffed full, brand new bills packed tight. I swatted him lightly, indignant. "I'm not a kid anymore. And who gives a Christmas present like this?" I added. "A whole bag of cash is just too much like a mob payout." He rolled the window down, letting the cold night air rush in and cool the heat inside the car. "Take it," he said simply. I asked, "You packed these yourself?" He drawled back, "My assistant did." "What, if I say that, you won't take it? And if I say yes?" He paused, then answered half truthfully, half teasing, "Fine. I did it myself. Our Nora's scholarship. How could I let someone else handle that?" Blake had always been someone others placed high on a pedestal. Caleb once joked that a man like him, even when he was deceiving you, put real thought into it. And the fact that he'd bother to put in that effort, even to lie to you, was something most people could only dream of. But in that moment, I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe the image in my mind, that in an empty penthouse high above the city, he'd stood alone with a cigarette between his lips, brow slightly furrowed, hands clumsy like someone doing crafts for the first time, stuffing stack after stack of cash into plain white envelopes. Hundreds of thousands in cash, divided into dozens of envelopes. Only Blake would think of something so awkwardly romantic. "Have you ever wrapped money like this for other women?" I asked. It was a willful question. One I asked knowing it might hurt. Blake looked down at me through the flickering light of the fireworks. "How could other women be the same as you?" In a moment like this, charged and intimate, he still wouldn't even lie and say there had been no one else. My question had already been a mistake in such a quiet yet electric atmosphere. I pretended not to hear his answer and changed the subject. "But I didn't prepare a gift for you." He laughed softly. "Just give me yourself. Aren't you afraid that'll shorten your life?" "Where are you staying tonight?" I asked. "I can look for a hotel nearby. Tomorrow morning." He pressed my phone down. "I'm leaving in a bit." I froze, a hollow disappointment spreading through me. Leaving. Family mass and brunch tomorrow morning. I can't miss it. You. He cupped the back of my head and kissed me lightly. "Enough. Go back inside and get some sleep." I blinked, a little dazed. "Then, after the holidays, I'll head back to school early?" "No rush," he said. "Stay and keep your mom company a little longer." Later, it was a driver sent by the Winslow family who took him away. After Blake left, I stood downstairs for a long time, unable to move, unable to collect myself. Tell me, when he falls for someone, he does put in the effort, doesn't he? That year, I finally began to surface within the industry. An independent film director named Ian came to the academy to cast his next project, and my headshot caught his eye instantly. Just like that, I became the female lead of his new film. It was the first film of my life in any real sense, the first time I stood in front of a camera as a leading actress, playing a girl at the very age I was myself, bright and unspent. That period happened to coincide with the rise of social media. Instagram and Twitter were just beginning to seep into everyday life. Ian's decision to boldly cast a complete newcomer drew no small amount of skepticism from critics. Blake didn't use any of those platforms. I didn't pay much attention to the noise either. Our life continued steadily inside that Manhattan apartment, insulated from the outside world. Before, aside from a bit of family foundation work, Blake's days were mostly about enjoying life. Later, my life disrupted his trajectory. I buried myself in scripts and character work. He stopped going out, sitting beside me with quarterly reports in hand. When Caleb called to invite him golfing, Blake replied casually over the phone, "The kid at home is preparing for finals. I've got to supervise studying." On set, I never showed fear. I was confident, bold, enough to earn everyone's respect. But the moment I got home, I'd cling to Blake and cry. What if I didn't do well in today's scene? What if the Rotten Tomatoes score tanks after release? He flipped through my thick script, pages layered with fluorescent highlights, then patted my head. Nora, if you can't make it, who in Hollywood possibly can? Really? Really? When has Blake Winslow ever lied to you? That year, Ian's coming-of-age film Here the Summer premiered and became the surprise breakout of the season, sweeping Sundance. Alongside the film's success rose a new name, Nora Lane. In 2013, I became a sudden sensation, labeled by Vanity Fair as the most promising new face. The day after the premiere, Blake booked out an entire private theater in Tribeca. His assistant, following orders, sent invitations, more accurately, compulsory screening notices, to his Wall Street friends and long-standing family associates. With deliberate mischief, Blake told the assistant to distribute tickets based on how many female companions each man brought. Some of his friends were forced to take several tickets at once. In their circle, backing actresses and throwing money at films was standard behavior. But no one had ever gone as far as Blake, forcing a room full of hedge fund men to sit through a youthful romance film, every seat filled. A few of his closer friends joked, asking why he was taking this so seriously. Blake lounged back with one leg crossed, voice lazy and unapologetic. If I tell you to watch it, then watch it. Stop whining. A handful of them ended up seeing Here the Summer multiple times with different girlfriends. After that, whenever they ran into me, there was a reflexive hint of reverence in their eyes. That year for me, truly felt like the phrase spring wind, swift hooves made real. After I gained some recognition, Blake became my secret for a time. He even complained about it occasionally, and I could only coax him along. Seeing me rush from one appearance to another, he joked, "Why don't I start an agency just to back you? Keep the money in the family." Standing in front of the mirror, fastening a necklace, I replied without turning around, "One day I'll start my own production company." You believe me? Blake stubbed out his cigarette and nodded. I do. But fame is fame, and resources are resources. That little bit of recognition I had earned was nowhere near enough in Hollywood's vast arena of power and profit. It showed most clearly when I was invited to attend the Golden Globes. My resume was still too thin, I couldn't even borrow a proper couture gown. That afternoon, Blake drove me to a discreet townhouse off Madison Avenue. I walked beside him and asked, "What are we doing here?" The main hall had been transformed into a private runway show. The audience consisted of exactly two people, Blake and me. He'd brought in dozens of models with builds similar to mine. One by one, they walked the runway wearing unreleased couture from major fashion houses, looping the walk again and again. "See anything you like? Pick," he said lightly. "If none of these work, have the designers over there make something custom." To the right stood a row of designers, names I'd only ever seen printed in glossy fashion magazines. The feeling that rose up inside me was strange. It wasn't excitement or delight. It was exhaustion. This was the first time Blake had shown me, so directly, the capital power behind him, even if it was only the tip of the iceberg. I looked at his calm, unremarkable expression and realized that to him, all of this was as ordinary as taking a drink of water when you're thirsty. I didn't say much. I deliberately chose something cleanly cut, understated, not too loud. Later, when did people in the industry start whispering about the Winslow gentleman behind Nora? It was probably after the male lead of one of my new films, a somewhat obsessive second-generation star, showed up downstairs at our apartment late at night, ringing the doorbell like a madman and calling my phone non-stop. Plenty of people fall for their co-stars. But his drama was nearly finished shooting, and he still couldn't let go. It bordered on stalking. Blake stood by the floor-to-ceiling window then, one hand in his pocket, the other holding my phone from the table, eyes cold as he watched the figure below. He answered the call, voice clipped and precise. "If you still want to work in this industry, I expect you to disappear within 3 seconds. Otherwise, you'll receive a restraining order tomorrow." The actor, of course, did not disappear within 3 seconds. But after that night, I heard very little about him. Supposedly, he ended up doing off-Broadway theater. A few days later, the name Mr. Winslow became firmly tied to mine. People who hated me labeled him a sugar daddy, digging through every opportunity I'd ever had, determined to prove that without this man, Nora would never have made it this far. But those who loved me defended me just as fiercely. They insisted I'd earned my place step by step, on acting alone. From 2012 to 2016, No one expected that I would stay by Blake's side for so long. Long enough that I almost believed a fairy tale might actually unfold in real life. We avoided paparazzi lenses, avoided every chase and every prying eye, and indulged ourselves completely. At the Spanish Steps in Rome, we kissed openly in the middle of the night, as if no one else existed. On Paris's left bank, we walked hand in hand, indistinguishable from the countless couples brushing past us. In Maui, he stood shirtless on a surfboard, charging waves several meters high while my heart hung suspended in my chest. He came back soaked in seawater and reckless laughter, and in the midst of cheers, grabbed the yacht railing and kissed me hard. We once picked up a stray dog on a Greek street. Blake spent $50,000 chartering a private plane just to bring it back to New York. He hired a dedicated dog sitter and trainer on Long Island. I stared at him, speechless. He laughed. Our love dog. Shouldn't it be special? Yes. He loved to play. Over the years, besides the love dog, there were love sports cars, love limited edition heels. He always had a reason. All those years, everyone could see it clearly. Everyone, except me. Before I pushed the door open, I heard Caleb joking with him from inside. His tone was light, teasing, but sharp enough to cut. You're still not bored of the one you've got with you, he laughed. Careful you don't keep acting and end up falling in for real. Even your mother lowered herself to ask me about it. Watch yourself. Through the narrow gap of the door, I heard the familiar click of Blake's silver lighter. He sounded lazy, careless to the bone. What's there to worry about, he said. It's not like I'm actually going to marry her. My hand slowly slid off the doorknob. I turned and walked away quickly, too quickly. I was afraid that if I lingered even a second longer, I'd lose control and burst in, demanding answers I already knew. Not long after, Blake called to ask why I hadn't arrived yet. I tugged at the corner of my mouth and lied, saying the production had run into a last-minute issue and needed reshoots. I'm an actress. People praise me for my performances. Blake isn't, and no one has ever praised his acting. And yet, I'd been completely immersed in his. Perhaps I should have given him an award. Before the arguments between Blake and me could fully erupt, something else arrived first, an invitation from his mother, Mrs. Winslow. She deliberately chose a day when Blake was in London handling family trust matters. She knew there was no need to sour her relationship with her son over me. I probably wasn't worth it. It had rained that morning. I rode in a Winslow family car to meet her. The car entered an estate in the Hamptons on Long Island, something straight out of The Great Gatsby, the kind of place that doesn't exist in real life, only in imagination and old money. Blake's mother wore a perfectly tailored suit, a cashmere shawl draped over her shoulders. Her hair was swept up immaculately. She looked elegant, composed, almost royal. Her smile felt like spring sunlight. And yet, there was no warmth in it at all. The first thing Mrs. Winslow said to me was, "Please sit, Miss Nora. Try the tea. First flush Darjeeling." She didn't need to know my full name. She had no interest in knowing it. Her second sentence followed smoothly. "Oh, and our bear Blake, that is, has been spending some time with you lately. He's always enjoyed making friends." I seem to have left a document on the terrace table earlier. The rain's gotten heavier. Would you mind fetching it for me? Bear. That was his childhood nickname. I didn't learn it until my 3rd year with him. I lowered my head, stood up, and went out to retrieve the damned document. Rain dripped steadily from the eaves. The Atlantic wind carried water that slapped against my body. I shielded the papers with my arms, soaked and awkward. Just as I reached the door, Mrs. Winslow's voice drifted out, calm and unhurried, as she spoke to the butler, clearly not bothering to lower her tone. A minor Hollywood star, nothing more. If she were truly Bear's friend, she'd come to the Winslow home properly, through the front door with a business card. Out of courtesy to Bear, I might consider handing her a check and sending her on her way. But if she's foolish enough to think a few tabloid headlines could pry open the doors of this family, then no amount of maneuvering will help her. Our family depends on invisibility and control. She represents noise and exposure. People like that are liabilities. She turned her head then and saw me through the floor-to-ceiling window, drenched from head to toe. A flawless, dignified smile spread across her face. Whether I'd heard her words or not didn't seem to matter to her. Or perhaps, that speech had been meant for me all along. She smiled gently and asked, "Did you get it?" I didn't step back into the living room with its expensive Persian carpets. I stayed outside, nodding in response. "Thank you for your trouble," she said. "I'll have the driver take you out. I have a charity gala meeting shortly, so I won't keep you." Just like that. This trip, it seemed, had only been to run errands for Blake. Maybe in his mother's eyes, I wasn't even qualified to be his assistant. I don't know how I managed to keep smiling, to steady my chaotic steps, and walk out of that estate with my dignity intact. When I looked back through the car window, the manor shrouded in rain and mist no longer looked elegant or grand. It looked like a massive beast, crouched there, ready to swallow people whole. When Blake returned from London, the first thing he asked was, "My mom came to see you, didn't she?" I had my back to him, packing my suitcase, not lifting my head. "Yeah." His ability to read my emotions had grown sharper than when we first got together. He crouched down and asked softly, "Did she upset you?" "My mom talks like that. She's used to giving orders and not thinking about other people's feelings. Don't take it to heart." I looked up at him. I looked for a long time, so long that he touched his face awkwardly. "What?" "Nothing," I said, lowering my head and continuing to fold clothes. "Your mother is very well-mannered." Mrs. Winslow was well-mannered. She just wasn't kind to me. Blake laughed. "Don't let her scare you. That's the first time I've ever heard anyone compliment her." "Scared?" "No." "But Blake, after this, I probably would never step foot into that estate again." Only then did he notice what I was doing. He frowned. "Where are you going?" "To London. My agent got me a 3-month advanced program at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art." I accepted. "I just got back from London, and now you're going there?" "Yeah. Just for a while." I tilted my head up and smiled at him. "It's not like you can't live without me." I loved him. Loved him so completely that he filled my entire field of vision. When that love overflowed, when I couldn't hold it back, I'd called his name again and again, whispering "I love you" over and over. At first, he'd smile careless, replying lightly, "I hear you. Blake likes our Nora too." Later, he stopped responding at all. He would only look at me deeply, say neither love nor liking, yet stubbornly insist that I say I loved him, again and again. I still loved him. But in that moment, I realized this love could no longer be given without restraint. One day, Blake and I would part. It was inevitable. Blake lived casually, almost lazily. But people raised in families like his, once they glimpse the outline of something, they can usually guess most of the picture. When his thoughts were in turmoil, his hands would move on their own, flicking his lighter open and shut. Click, click. The sound echoed endlessly through the room. "Have you ever thought about switching paths?" he said. "You love acting so much, why not teach drama at a university? Or do off-Broadway plays no one pays attention to? You don't have to stay in Hollywood. It's a dye vat. It stains everything." My hand paused on the suitcase zipper for a brief second, then continued as if nothing had happened. "Being a teacher, a librarian. I could do any of that." "But Blake," I said quietly, "you've seen 18-year-old Nora standing on set for 10 hours just to get a background role. You've seen 19-year-old Nora practicing a single line until she whispered it even in her sleep. You've seen every moment of exhaustion and embarrassment I went through chasing this dream. And you've also seen me shine at premieres. So how could you say something like that?" I asked, voice trembling. "Do you want me to become a decorative vase hidden away in some inner chamber?" I didn't realize it at first. Only after those few short sentences were out did I notice. My tears had already fallen, soaking into the fabric of the suitcase. Blake crouched down and lifted me into his arms. He lowered his head, carefully wiping away my tears, one by one. "My fault," he murmured. "I was just asking. I'm not forcing you. If you don't like it, then don't go, okay?" I understood his unspoken meaning perfectly. If I stopped being a star, stopped generating those troublesome headlines, maybe his family could tolerate my existence. But I couldn't say that out loud. I couldn't bring myself to tell him, "Blake, your mother, your family, they won't change their minds whether I become a teacher or stay an actress. No matter what I choose, I will never truly be accepted. Because my existence itself is a risk to you." The day I was leaving for JFK, Blake sped all the way to the airport. Normally, he lived lazily, even drove like an old-school gentleman, measured, restrained. Seeing him like this was rare. He came straight through the VIP channel and stopped me. "Any kind of teacher you want, I'll hire them and bring them to New York. Don't go to London." "Okay." He'd grown up surrounded by indulgence, always admired, always indulged. No matter how mature he became, deep down there was still something childlike, reckless, selfish, fiercely possessive. I patted his hand gently, the way you soothe a child who's acting out. "I'm not leaving forever," I said softly. "What are you doing?" "Nora," he said, eyes sharp, "don't let me find out you're planning to leave me." He saw right through me. I realized then that nothing ever truly escaped his gaze, and that realization felt awful. "Blake, don't think like that," I said. "I'm just trying to become better. I'm improving. Shouldn't you be happy for me?" If I couldn't even stand firmly on my own career, how could I ever deserve someone as radiant as you? Even if one day I left you, I wanted to leave as someone independent and capable, not as an accessory discarded at will. He lowered his eyes at last and finally let go. All he said was, "Go early. Come back soon." Those 3 months in London, those multiple flights across the Atlantic, were proof of how he loved me at that point in time. We were both trying so hard to love each other. And yet, no matter how hard we tried, it seemed this was as far as we could go. Outside the window, the setting sun washed over Big Ben. Pigeons startled into flight across the square, leaving drifting silhouettes in the air. I pulled my gaze back and turned my head to look at Blake, asleep against my shoulder. His sleep was restless. His brows were faintly furrowed. The collar of his shirt was misshapen from long-haul travel. I brushed his bangs aside with my fingers and suddenly realized, years ago the boy who'd leaned against a windowsill and called me Little Swan, that lightness, that youthful ease, had been worn down by time and the weight of his family. I got sick in London. A bad cold, feverish and weak. By then, Blake knew exactly how to take care of me. After feeding me Tylenol, he lay half beside me, one hand gently patting my back until I drifted into sleep. I still remembered the first time I'd ever been sick in front of him. He'd been utterly helpless, someone who'd never taken care of anyone before, forced to learn everything from scratch. Back then, he'd picked up some folk remedy from who knows where, insisting hot lemon water with honey could cure a cold. While I slept, he'd fumbled around in the kitchen for ages, nearly cutting his hand. When I came downstairs holding the banister, he looked up at me. Across a room filled with the scent of lemons, we shared a smile. That night, after midnight, I woke drenched in sweat. My fever had broken, my mind suddenly clear, and I couldn't fall back asleep. In that old London apartment, I pulled out a black and white film. I'd watched it alone countless times before, so many times I could recite every line without missing a word. Blake was asleep beside me, so I muted the sound. A black and white film, played in silence, felt like watching a silent movie. He stirred and opened his eyes groggily, asking what I was doing. I pointed at the screen. He forced his eyes open a little wider, speaking to me in fits and starts. "You should sleep," I said softly. "I'll watch it on my own." He smiled, his voice thick with drowsiness. "How can you watch a movie alone?" On the screen, Princess Anne was secretly climbing down from the embassy wall, beginning a single day in Rome she would savor for the rest of her life. When I'd watched it in the past, I'd been captivated only by Audrey Hepburn's radiant smile, by the courage of a princess trying to break free from royal constraints. But watching it now, I realized, almost belatedly, that the princess who escaped a rigid hierarchy, who lived one ordinary yet romantic day, ultimately returned to her rightful place, leaving behind Joe Bradley, a man whose world was light years away from hers. He watched her walk off, surrounded by crowds. He turned back alone. And that final empty hole in the film, how devastating it was. After 3 months of indulgent love, that moment became the first time in years that I carefully, tentatively, and formally said goodbye to him. Flying from Heathrow back to JFK, standing before the bustling crowd at the exit, I said quietly, "Blake, you don't have to walk me out." His hand, just about to grab my suitcase, stopped. He looked at me, confused, or perhaps unwilling to understand. "What is it? Are you not feeling well?" I kept smiling. "When I get back, I have to see producers right away. There's a lot of work waiting. I was thinking we..." He lifted a hand to stop me, clearly not following. Nora, are you breaking up with me? Blake, I asked seriously, did we ever have the kind of relationship that was acknowledged? In his world, no one had ever truly believed we were together. They preferred to say, Blake keeps a young actress. She's been with Winslow for quite a while. That day, I got into the nanny van sent by my agency. As it passed Blake's Bentley, he was still standing there, unmoving, lost in thought. After returning from the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, I signed with CAA, the largest talent agency in the United States. Its Jewish founder had connections stretching across Hollywood and Wall Street, and inevitably, those lines always curved back to the Winslow family. I became famous early. After that youth film exploded, offers poured in. Over the next few years, I made many films. Because Blake was there, even though he never appeared publicly, no one dared force me into compromises or trash projects. I had the luxury of choosing my scripts carefully. I was gone in London for only 3 months, and social media had already erupted. People said I was young, barely established, yet bold enough to disappear for so long. They mocked my confidence, saying actresses more stable and accomplished than me were jumping from one project straight into the next without pause. I threw myself into new work, completely focused. Sometimes, I still thought of Blake. Someone as proud as him, this was probably the first time he'd ever been treated that way. Later, Caleb told me Blake had started pursuing a roundabout strategy at home. The curve, apparently, was his grandmother. Recently, whenever he had a spare moment, Blake would hover around his grandmother with an iPad in hand, pointing at Nora on late-night talk shows and asking with earnest seriousness, "Is this girl pretty? Would you want her as your granddaughter-in-law?" Day after day, he stayed by the old woman's side, repeating my virtues until they nearly became a chant. He praised how carefully I took care of his stomach problems, how well I'd done at NYU, straight A's, top of my class, and how, at such a young age, I'd already built a real career for myself. Slowly, inevitably, whenever his grandmother saw Nora appear on television, she would pause and watch a little longer. Until one Thanksgiving, at the dinner table, she mentioned Nora almost absent-mindedly, saying the girl looked kind, pleasant to the eye. Blake tightened his grip on his knife and fork. The next second, his mother's voice cut in, calm to the point of chill. Mrs. Winslow smiled. "Mom, are you getting confused? She's an actress. It's all acting." What was muddled wasn't age. It was the heart. The old woman's fondness for Blake was crushed, without mercy, by colder family rules. Luckily, I hadn't believed Caleb's nearly exaggerated retelling. If Blake had truly put in that kind of effort, it would have frightened me. After all, he had never planned on a future with me. You see, he was still indifferent, still drifting through the marketplace of power and prestige. No one could ever make him stay. That afternoon, I was sitting by the window of a Michelin-starred restaurant in Manhattan, my gaze falling on a table not far away. Blake was there, seated with a young woman. She clung to his arm, dressed head to toe in the latest Chanel, her face open and innocent. A classic upper-class matchmaking scene. Her background wasn't hard to guess, another trust fund heiress from a family orbit I would never reach. As if sensing something, Blake slowly turned his head and looked over. I should have looked away. But my heart was unsettled. We'd only just separated, how could the old be replaced so quickly? So I leaned against the window frame and met his slightly furrowed gaze head-on. For 1 second only. Then I pulled down the blinds beside me. Blake came around by another route to find me, deliberately avoiding any mention of what had just happened. He knew as well as I did, some things once spoken, only tore open more ugliness. "You leaving?" he asked. "I'll take you." I shook my head. The producer I was meeting hadn't arrived yet. The business wasn't done. "Then I'll wait," Blake said, sitting down across from me as if it were the most natural thing in the world. That day, I talked with the producer about my new film for a long time. Throughout the conversation, he kept glancing toward Blake Winslow, who sat nearby with his head lowered, idly scrolling through his phone. Later, Blake explained to me, half serious, half casual, that the meeting had been arranged by his family, something he couldn't avoid. He'd just shown up to go through the motions. Whether he loved me or not was hard to say. But his heart was always swaying. When it tilted in my direction, even briefly, I became the winner, for that moment only. Then the hospital called. I was in the middle of rushing to shoot a magazine cover when the cold, professional voice of the medical staff froze me in place. "Sarah, help me apologize to them," I said, barely thinking. "My mom was in a car accident in New Jersey. I need to get back right now." On the way there, my mind filled with horrifying possibilities, sharp as needles, stabbing over and over. When I reached the hospital's VIP ward, I shoved the door open in a panic, only to see that elegant, composed woman sitting there. My limbs went cold. My whole body started to shake. "Why did you rush back?" my mother said from the bed. "I'm fine. I even told them not to call you." She lay there smiling, a woman who had worked hard her entire life, her face still carrying that simple, anxious warmth. Mrs. Winslow sat there with her hands folded neatly, back straight, settled into a visitor's chair that looked expensive at a glance. She turned toward me, her smile still perfectly composed, perfectly gentle. She exchanged polite words with the woman on the bed. "So this is your daughter? She's very beautiful. You're quite fortunate." Pride rose instantly on my mother's face. "Yes," she said warmly. "This is my Nora." "Nora," my mother went on, "it was this kind lady who helped me. Her driver witnessed the accident. He not only called the ambulance, he even arranged for this best room. You must thank her properly." I forced a smile and stepped between them, gripping my handbag tightly, using the pressure to hide the tremor in my wrists. "Mrs. Winslow," I said, my voice steady only by sheer effort, "I'll walk you out." "Nora, why are you sending her away like that?" "Mom," I cut in gently, "I'll thank her properly." Mrs. Winslow rose slowly. Her pale, tailored suit was immaculate, not a single crease out of place. She lowered her head and patted my mother's arm, smiling as she told her to focus on recovery and take good care of herself. I closed the door and followed her down the corridor. At the far end, I finally spoke. "What is it you want?" She adjusted the hairpin at her temple and laughed softly. "Don't overthink things, young lady. My driver happened to pass by and lent a hand. I saved your mother, and this is how you speak to me." "Oh, and there's no need to tell Bear about today," she added lightly. "Young people tend to overthink, just like you. The Winslow Foundation does charity work every day. This is a trivial matter. Don't take it to heart." I watched her back recede down the corridor. My legs gave out, and I lowered myself onto a chair, covering my face as sobs burst out uncontrollably. How dare she treat my mother like this? This was her warning. She could save my mother with effortless ease, and she could just as easily destroy us. With that lofty, condescending kindness, she reminded me once again of the gap between our worlds. At the edge of life and death, my mother's survival depended on her casual generosity. "I don't really know. A car suddenly came out of nowhere," my mother said later, trying to reassure me. "I woke up and I was already here. Thankfully, I met a good person." "Oh Nora, don't cry," she added quickly. "Look, I'm fine, aren't I? Just a leg injury. Some rest and I'll be good as new." "I told you it wasn't serious. You work so hard, and you still rushed back. I've only dragged you down." How selfish I was. Because of my greed, because of my unwillingness to let go, I had almost dragged her into an abyss. While I was taking care of my mother in the New Jersey hospital, Blake came. I stayed inside the room. He waited alone in the outpatient hall, sitting there by himself. I leaned against the doorway and looked at him. The feeling I'd had at 18, that sense that he didn't belong in something as ordinary as a cheap pizza place, came surging back, cresting violently in my chest. I said to him, "Go back to Manhattan. Don't come here again." He glanced past me toward the hospital room, exhaustion etched between his brows from constant travel. "It's fine," he said. "Your mom's almost ready for discharge. It's not far from New York." He tilted his head back, slumping slightly into the chair. I said, "Don't come anymore. Not now. Not ever. I mean it's over, Blake. Let it stop here. Stop while the feelings are still intense. Give each other the most dignified exit possible." He stared at me steadily, completely refusing to acknowledge the finality in my words. His voice softened. "Your mom had an accident. I know you're not in a good place right now. Calm down first. I won't bother you for a while." As he spoke, he picked up the jacket draped over his legs and stood. There's a merger I need to deal with. I'll head back. If you need anything, call me. I laughed bitterly, the words escaping before I could stop them. How far do you think this can go, Blake? How long are you planning to play this game with me? Aren't you tired yet? He turned his head, jaw clenched tight. Playing. His voice hardened. These past few years, I won't say I poured my heart out completely, but everything I could give you, Nora, I gave you. We've come this far, and now you say I was just playing with you. Don't you think that's cruel? I looked up at him. The fortress I'd struggled so hard to build inside myself felt like it was about to collapse in an instant. And the words that came out only grew sharper, more relentless. Then what is it? I asked. Do you, Blake Winslow, actually plan on marrying me? The coat clenched in his hand crumpled under the pressure of his fingers. For a moment, silence swallowed everything. The air seemed to stop moving, as if we were both holding our breath, waiting to see who would break first. He lowered his head and said nothing. I didn't need to wound him further. Just like that, he moved against the flow of people rushing through the hospital corridor, carving a path in reverse, step by step, opening up a distance that felt like a chasm. Blake didn't speak, and he didn't leave. Deep down, he sensed it already, whatever he and Nora had, it was ending. And so, even in a moment this humiliating, he refused to move. He would rather stay shamelessly, squeezing out every remaining second with her before the farewell became unavoidable. He had once smiled unstoppable, like a god descending to earth, and said, Nora, when has Blake Winslow ever lied to you? Yes. Blake had never lied to me. The sun sets in Santorini. The sun rises in the Caribbean. Every promise he'd tossed out casually, half-jokingly, over the years, he'd fulfilled them all. But in that moment I thought, after all these years, if this really is the end, you could have lied just once, Blake. Let me believe that at least for a single moment, you had imagined a future with me. There was an attic in my heart, sealed shut on all sides. Everyone thought it was locked forever, no escape. In that moment, I opened the door and let him out. In this world, there are countless trials you cannot avoid. Even with limitless capital, there are destinies you cannot buy your way past. He had once lowered himself into the dust, only to wake from 1,000 illusions. No matter how untouchable he seemed, Blake Winslow could not escape the fate written by his family. Maybe it was habit. Maybe it was exhaustion, the reluctance to invest in learning someone new. Slowly, he began to cling to memory instead. That December, New York was buried under heavy snow. Fifth Avenue and Central Park disappeared beneath a white expanse. From the penthouse along Billionaire's Row, you could overlook a Manhattan swallowed whole by wind and ice. In the depths of night, the Empire State Building stood unnaturally silent. Blake and I sat on opposite sides of the floor-to-ceiling windows in the living room. His reflection hovered in the glass, his body slightly bent, head lowered, long fingers winding and unwinding around an unlit cigarette. The silence stretched on too long. Finally, as if realizing it himself, he lifted his head, leaned back, resting his forearm across his brow. After a long pause, he spoke. Stay in New York a little longer, he said quietly. Wait until the snowstorm passes. Winter flights get delayed so easily. I stared at the objects around me. This apartment was saturated with traces of us. All it took was a glance upward, and memories, soaked in love and resentment, came rushing back. The tireless entanglements deep into the night. The laughter as we kissed by Central Park in broad daylight. Those moments that once felt like they could stretch all the way to the end of time. I don't think so, I said softly. The place in Los Angeles is already settled. I won't stay here and get in your way. He straightened abruptly, then bent forward again, hands braced on his knees, eyes dark as they fixed on me. Without another word, he forcefully put everything I'd packed back where it belonged, allowing me to take only basic necessities. My silk pajamas were meant to stay in the second compartment of the master bedroom closet. My high heels belonged in the display cabinet by the entryway. And that cheap stuffed pig I'd bought from IKEA, the one I loved most, had to sit properly on the pillow, exactly where it always had. He put everything back exactly where it belonged, one item at a time, without a single mistake, like someone with a meticulous, almost obsessive memory. I turned my head sharply, pain surging through my chest in relentless waves. Blake, when did someone like you start remembering all these trivial details so clearly? He sat down on the long pile rug in front of me, one knee bent, gazing out at the glittering city lights beyond the window. The crystal chandelier cast its glow across his pale face, across the slightly open collar of his black shirt, across his rolled-up sleeves and lean forearms, across the sharp lines of his profile. A sigh, so soft it was almost inaudible. He turned back to me and traced my face inch by inch, as if appraising an antique painting that was about to be lost forever. "Going to Los Angeles for a while is good," he said quietly. "And about your mother. I'm sorry. I've already spoken to my mother. That kind of thing won't happen again." He didn't tell Nora what happened the day he nearly split from Mrs. Winslow at the board meeting. How the ever-elegant Winslow matriarch had abandoned all decorum, accusing him of selfishness and recklessness, of irresponsibility, of being unfit to manage the family trust. Her stance was uncompromising. "Blake, you can play with actresses. Play with as many as you want. Just don't let me see you lose touch with reality. Do you have any idea what responsibility you're carrying? Do you know how much your impulsiveness could drag down stock prices, how many alliances it could cost this family?" When his mother decided on something, not even he could stop her. Capital had its own cold will. He compromised. He bowed his head to fate, in exchange for her taking one step back. Head tilted upward, eyes burning with unshed tears, he could only lower himself and plead, voice rough. "Please don't touch her or her mother. I'm begging you. Just leave me a way out." Blake's fingers were cold as they lingered over me, reverent, as though touching priceless treasure. He made his demand softly, but firmly. "You can go to Los Angeles. But this city, New York, you'll come back. Nora, you will come back. I'll be here. I'll wait for you in New York." The place I bought in Los Angeles was in Santa Monica, a short distance from the beach. Quiet enough to breathe, close enough to watch the Pacific swallow the sun at dusk. When I left New York, Blake sent me off at the private airport just as he always did. His expression was steady, composed, as if I were simply heading west for another shoot. I couldn't understand it, how, trapped in a dead end like this, he still believed there was something he could do. We didn't say goodbye. But deep down, I knew it clearly, unless something impossible happened, we wouldn't see each other again. He stubbornly refused to part with me, offering only the same old words. "Go early. Come back soon." On the plane, I unexpectedly ran into Caleb. He smiled and greeted me. Over the years, the women around him had changed like scenery. Sometimes you'd even see him calmly escorting two Victoria's Secret models at the same time. Sitting across the aisle, he flipped through the Wall Street Journal without lifting his head and said evenly, "In the early days, every woman around him wanted desperately to climb higher through him, and every one of them was afraid of him. He's always treated you differently. Everyone in our circle has seen it these past few years. Since he's taken you seriously, you should prepare yourself. This isn't something you can just walk away from because you feel like it." In our world, there are plenty of marriages for the family, with everyone playing their own games on the side. If you don't want to end up trapped in something like that, you might need to be ruthless. Reputation and dignity matter more than anything in our circle. I closed my eyes and said nothing. But he knew, I was listening. After returning to Los Angeles, I spent several months in a constant state of unease, nerves stretched tight. During that time, I never went back to New York, but Blake came to LA. Sometimes it was just a simple dinner. Other times, he'd stay a few days at a hotel in Beverly Hills. Meanwhile, the new film I was shooting at the studio was nearing completion. It was a biographical film positioned squarely for an Oscar run, backed by several major streaming giants. Every side involved took the project seriously, partly because of the script and the production team, and partly because the male lead was Chase Miller, the hottest actor of the moment. The year before, he'd dominated the box office with an action film. In terms of popularity and visibility, he was riding a wave almost no one else could match. I'd heard he started out as a stunt double, originally carving out a path as a tough guy action star. But in this era, that route was hard to sustain. His agent, sharp and forward-thinking, had mapped out a transition towards serious acting roles instead. "Nora, are you okay?" I was still dazed, dressed in my vintage costume, when a voice sounded beside me. I turned and saw Chase, wearing a perfectly tailored 1930s suit. In Hollywood, his looks ranked near the top, deep-set eyes, sculpted features like something carved from marble. The faint scar on his chin made him instantly recognizable. It was precisely that face that allowed him to pivot so quickly from action roles into a wide range of dramatic parts. I shook my head. I'm fine. Thanks. He held a bottle of water casually and handed it to me. The California sun's brutal. Drink some. I paused, then took it. Thank you. As I accepted the bottle, a memory surfaced unexpectedly. 2 years earlier, I'd accepted something from him the same way. Back then, I was shooting a superhero movie. Chase had a small supporting role as a villain. We barely shared any scenes, so when he approached me with a pen and paper asking for an autograph, I hesitated for a moment. When I handed him the signed photo, Blake had been watching from the nanny van. After I got in the car, he'd asked darkly who that was. Just a coworker, I'd said while fastening my seatbelt. His mom's a big fan of mine, so he wanted a signature. Don't get any ideas. By then, Blake's possessiveness was already unmistakable. He disliked any man who came near me, and every man I acted opposite. That was why he never came to set to watch me film. He never tried to understand my work. After we wrapped for the day, Sarah came over with a contract. The entire team had high hopes for this film. We'd spent nearly 8 months preparing just to secure it. But when I looked at the reshoot clause, my head started to ache. We really have to go to New York to film this? Sarah met my gaze and nodded. It's clearly stated in the contract. The investors insist the final key scenes be shot on location in New York. It's for awards consideration. Fighting the dull ache in my chest, I said, almost petulantly, what if I don't go? Replace me. She was calmer than I was, steadier too. Do you know how much the penalty is? Tens of millions. Think carefully. I folded my arms and turned to look out at the glowing stream of cars along Sunset Boulevard. For the first time in years, Blake had directly interfered with my work. I didn't need to ask to know, it had his fingerprints all over it. Caleb's words echoed again and again in my mind. People like them cared about one thing above all else. Appearance. Dignity. Reputation. The day I tore through Blake's sense of dignity, his private jet landed in Los Angeles from London. I'd thought we were headed for another explosive fight. Instead, he took me to a wedding, one of the grandest society weddings the East Coast elite had seen in years. That wedding gathered nearly everyone Blake was connected to. Every network, every alliance, every polished relationship. And yet, coming on the heels of that incident, most of them already knew, the woman Blake kept by his side was an ungrateful, disobedient liability. Caleb stood across from me with a champagne flute in hand, speaking softly over a tall cocktail table. Nora, he said, almost amused, you're something else. He's letting his reputation get dragged through the dirt just to bring you here, just to stand beside you and show everyone, you're his. No one dares say it to his face anyway. I watched Blake walking toward me. My chest tightened with uncertainty and bitterness. You've made the board this big, I thought. Have you ever considered how a game with no ending is supposed to conclude? When it was time to toss the bouquet, the bride, who barely knew me, specifically invited me up. Blake sat in the primary guest seat to the left, watching. The flowers in the ballroom glowed under the crystal chandeliers, colors bursting in layers. In the middle of all that joy, all that celebration, I didn't blink as I looked straight at him. White wedding dress. Flowers everywhere. Friends and family filling the room with laughter. This moment, perhaps it was the closest Blake and I would ever come to the word marriage in our hopeless future. The countdown reached 3. The bouquet, meant to symbolize happiness, flew backward. I lowered my head, deliberately avoiding Blake's gaze, and stepped aside, letting the flowers pass me by. Behind me, the woman who caught them erupted into cheers. When I looked back at Blake, the faint curve of his lips had vanished. His mouth was pressed into a hard line, his eyes dark, fixed on me with something heavy and unsettled. So, I said quietly, head lowered, asking again, can you give me back the ring I gave you? Blake slipped the ring off his finger and searched his suit pocket for a long moment. Then hoarsely, I swear I had it with me. Yes. He'd had it with him. So how could it be gone? The ring had been a pair. I bought them with my very first paycheck at 18, combined with the money I'd earned from countless shifts carrying trays at restaurants. It was the most expensive thing I'd ever bought back then. To him, It probably didn't even amount to the cost of a single dinner. But at the time, I was the only one by his side, and he'd indulged me without restraint. He wore that cheap silver ring for 8 years, never took it off, not even in board meetings. Now his face was pale with panic. He stared at his empty palm, lost, as if he didn't know what to do next. I turned my head away. I couldn't bear to look. Then a dull groan sounded. I spun around just in time to see him collapse forward onto the table, face drained of color, cold sweat breaking out as he clutched his stomach. Blake? Blake. I knew his body too well. Years of pressure and heavy drinking had finally destroyed what was already a fragile stomach. I helped him to the bed in the suite, poured water, fed him painkillers. I took a towel and wiped the sweat from his face, one careful pass after another. Then I slid off the bed, intending to go make some hot soup in the kitchen. His brow was tightly drawn, one hand pressing against his abdomen. The other reached out and grabbed me, his forehead nudging closer. Don't go, Nora. Sick. Blake was like fragile white porcelain. I brushed aside the damp hair on his forehead and slowly smoothed the crease between his brows. I'm not leaving, I said softly. I'm just getting you something warm to eat. I don't want to eat, he muttered. Stay. Every time he had an episode, it was like he became a different person, childish, unreasonable, impossible. And within the limits of what I could still allow myself, I couldn't bring myself to abandon him. The marks we'd left on each other ran too deep. Not seeing him was bearable, but the moment our eyes met, that pain like cutting flesh from bone, came soaring back through my mind. Blake took his medication and slept through the night. I stayed awake on the sofa beside him, keeping watch. And yet, when morning came, I woke up resting against his arm. Just like thousands of mornings before, opening my eyes to the familiar line of his jaw. I shifted back instinctively, nearly rolling off the bed, when he bent his arm and pulled me back. Call your assistant, I said quietly. Have him send a driver for you. I didn't finish the rest. I set his coat neatly on the sofa and looked at him, my expression calm. He leaned back against the headboard and murmured, "Wait a little longer." What were we waiting for? How long was longer? I no longer had the strength to ask. Blake's fiancée was named Vanessa, an heiress from another old financial dynasty. She wanted to see me. Her security team made sure I understood this was less an invitation than a demand. The meeting took place in an extremely private tea room at the Beverly Hills Hotel. We sat facing each other. Vanessa carried almost the same aura as Mrs. Winslow, an elegance shaped by elite boarding schools and Ivy League halls. Polished, refined, untouchable. On her right hand, resting beside a bone china teacup, was a massive pink diamond engagement ring. Blake's ring. Occasionally, California sunlight would strike the stone, scattering sharp white light like blades. It hurt my eyes to look at it. She smiled at me and opened with her first sentence. Miss Nora, I don't mind. I was momentarily confused. Mind what? Her smile grew more composed, more corporate, like she was presenting at a board meeting. I don't mind your relationship with Blake. I'm well aware that he won't love me. So who he loves is irrelevant to me. I'm not marrying him solely as a man. In our world, the merger of family trusts and voting power on boards matter far more than cheap romance. He's simply been distracted by feelings. She slid a document across the table. It looked like a non-disclosure agreement. So I thought, she continued smoothly, that since you're an actress without scandals, it's actually quite suitable for you to stay by his side. It's safer than him getting involved with some influencer or escort whose background we can't verify. As long as you sign this, agree never to make your relationship public and never do anything that could harm either family's stock price, I can tolerate your existence. I knew, of course, that Blake was no longer just Blake. On Wall Street, he had become a symbol. The value radiating outward from that symbol, stocks, capital, influence, made up his entire life, a destiny he could never escape. What she said wasn't entirely wrong. It was the norm in their world. The fig leaf called an open marriage. But he was someone I had loved with my entire youth. I couldn't bear to hear him reduced to a commodity like this. What do you take him for? I asked, forcing the words past the tightness in my chest. A tool to stabilize a business empire? Or an asset you can divide at will? He's not like that, I said, my voice strained. Whether or not he loves someone has nothing to do with this. If he chooses to marry you, he will take responsibility. You don't even know him, and yet you belittle him so casually. You. I stood up. I had no right to say any more. All I said softly was, "You may not mind. But I do." Vanessa's expression darkened. Her smile disappeared. "I didn't expect you to be so troublesome, Miss Nora. Do you think this is some kind of idle drama?" I had no desire to tangle with her further. I turned and headed for the door. The moment I lifted my foot to leave, Blake and his mother stepped out of the private elevator. The instant he saw me, his body froze. His brows drew tight, his gaze sharpening in a flash. "Vanessa," he snapped. "What are you doing?" Mrs. Winslow moved faster than he did. She lifted a hand and beckoned Vanessa over. In the blink of an eye, the three of them stood together, forming an unbreakable wall of class and power. Cold spread through my entire body. I knew with sudden clarity that I never should have been here. This was their world, built on transactions, strategy, and polished hypocrisy. Blake took a step toward me. I flinched back like a startled animal. "Don't come any closer." My fingers clenched around my handbag strap until my knuckles went white. "Don't. Your mother alone is enough to crush what little dignity I have left. Add a fiancé who sees you as an asset, and I simply can't bear it." He stopped. His face hardened as he spoke over his shoulder. "Mother. Vanessa. Go back first. Please." I turned, spotted another exit, and walked away without looking back. Blake's calls rang again and again. I didn't answer. Caleb called too, clearly confused about what was happening. I shut my phone off and returned to the apartment, hands and feet icy cold. Later, I learned that Caleb had called Blake back. Just before hanging up, he said slowly, "Blake, Vanessa's already stepped on Nora's bones. Can you really control her? Nora can't survive as a secret lover. Give her a way out. Don't force her down a dead end." Blake's fingers tightened around his phone. His reply was cold. "What do you take me for? Who do you think you are, crossing the line to lecture me like this?" When emotions explode, words cut the deepest. Blake paused, then added, "Sorry. That's not what I meant." On the other end, Caleb let out a soft laugh, edged with something bleak. "Right. In more than 20 years, this is the only time I've dared to speak to you like this. There won't be another." The door opened. Blake stepped in from the darkness. He walked straight to me, lifted a hand to my face, and pulled me into his arms. "What are you still waiting for, Blake?" My cheek pressed against his shirt, the warmth of his chest seeping through the thin fabric. "How many 8-year stretches do we have left, where we can still be reckless? Don't wait anymore." In the flood of the world, in the vortex of fame and power, no one escapes untouched. Love, when it runs too deep, never lasts, it only leaves shattered bones behind. We leaned into each other in the dark room, holding on for so long that the neon lights outside Santa Monica flickered on, then faded again. At last, he spoke. "Didn't you always want to see the northern lights? These past few years, I was too busy. Just, stay with me one last time." After a long silence, I nodded. "Okay." We stayed one night in Helsinki, then left for Rovaniemi the next day, the place the world agrees is closest to the aurora. Tourists came and went, faces lit with excitement along the way. No one knew this was the final journey of my life with him. Beneath the ancient blazing sky of the Arctic Circle, we shed the Winslow name, shed Hollywood's glow, and kissed each other with earnest abandon. All that surging love felt as though it had crossed billions of light years, only to burn, flare, and finally vanish. Under a sky scattered with diamond-bright stars, inside a glass-domed ice cabin, we clung to each other in the dark with everything we had left. All the things that could no longer be said in words were proven again and again, in the only way that remained. Blurred faces in the darkness. Vision clouded, senses tangled. Desire spread without restraint, thick and suffocating, leaving no room to breathe. Blake had no real interest in the aurora. Every second of his attention was spent on the person beside him, using his eyes to trace her features inch by inch, as if engraving her into memory, to carry her through the decades that would follow. Under the shifting curtains of color, the girl gazing upward seemed to overlap with her 18-year-old self. That was the year she had burst into his life, like a beam of light that could never be held. At the return airport, the flights split in two directions. One to New York. One to Los Angeles. We paused for a moment within the moving crowd. "Go," Blake said, pressing a hand to my shoulder, gently turning me around. "Don't look back." I dragged my suitcase forward a few steps, then stopped. "Let me be selfish just one last time, Blake." I turned back and, like I had so many times before, opened my arms toward him. I didn't manage to speak. The tears came first. He crossed the distance in a few long strides, the wind of his movement lifting his black cashmere coat. He wrapped me tightly in his arms. We held each other with a force that felt like we were trying to grind each other's souls into bone. For the decades that followed our lives, there would be no us. So many words crowded his throat, things he wanted to remind me of, to say to me. In the end, he only whispered, "Take good care of yourself." The Milky Way spilled overhead. The universe turned. Time kept moving. Across vast light years, our short lives were insignificant. All those chaotic years of love and hatred were gifts from time itself, and then quietly retreated into memory. Blake Winslow. This is as far as you and I go in this lifetime. Epilogue. 3 years later. Nora Lane and Chase Miller's public relations teams announced their marriage at the same time. People magazine and social media exploded instantly. The hashtag Nora and Chase wedding shot to the top of global trending lists. Just as the internet buzz reached a fever pitch, breaking news came out of New York. Blake Winslow, the current head of the Winslow family, was involved in a serious car accident on the George Washington Bridge during a stormy night. His wife, Vanessa, rushed to New York Presbyterian Hospital and immediately sealed off all information from the public. According to witnesses, the car had been heading in the direction of JFK Airport. End of main story.
Extra story. Caleb. The outsider's bet. Caleb still remembered the first time he saw Nora. It was at a private yacht party in the Hamptons. The 18-year-old girl was beautiful like a money and power. Blake rarely brought a steady companion into their circle. More often than not, he sat alone in the shadows of the deck, smoking, watching the rest of them, those second-generation heirs, make a racket. And with the suffocating background of the Winslow family, unless Blake actively chose to approach someone, the usual social climbers couldn't get within 3 feet of him. Caleb was different. He had an older brother groomed as the heir, and parents who only cared about stock prices. Their sole demand of him was simple: don't overdose and die in the street. So among that pack of Ivy League bastards, Caleb was the one who played the hardest. That was why, when Blake brought Nora out for the first time, Caleb couldn't help but look at her a little longer. Her features were striking and vivid, yet her eyes were clear and untainted, more alive than any model he'd ever seen drifting through Fashion Week. Blake didn't formally introduce her to anyone. It was obvious, at most, Nora was just a +1 at the party. Caleb didn't pay her much more attention. In their world, women in that position usually disappeared after one appearance. But later he saw her again, and again, and again, and then countless times more. Each time, she stayed close to Blake, obedient and quiet. When Blake and the others played Texas Hold'em, she would sit beside him without a word, holding a glass of champagne she barely touched. Until that one night when Blake pushed her into the game. Nora didn't actually know how to play poker, but she was sharp. She watched, she learned quickly, especially the art of bluffing. Caleb was sitting directly across from her. He watched her hold a terrible hand, yet still shove all her chips forward with an all-in. That fearless, newborn calf audacity caught him off guard for a split second. That night, Caleb asked her name, even though he already knew the answer. She said her name was Nora. At the beginning, no one could deny it. Blake's interest in Nora looked like a passing fancy. Caleb thought so too. So he watched her dive headfirst into Blake's world, the way one watches a Broadway tragedy that's already written. On the surface, he was polite and friendly. But in his mind, he was always calculating. This girl was naive to an almost dangerous degree. One day, she would pay for it with half her life, chewed up and spat out by this ruthless circle. Only the name was real. No one expected Nora and Blake's entanglement to last so long. Only Caleb knew this much. Nora was still Nora, loving with reckless sincerity. It was Blake who had changed, slowly turning into something closer to an ordinary man with a visible weakness. A few times, in those Manhattan cigar lounges that only members could enter, Caleb overheard Blake teasing her. Nora had grown up in California, yet she insisted on imitating Blake's old-money accent, the lazy, slurred vowels of legacy families. She copied it terribly, not a single sound right. Came out ridiculous and oddly charming. Blake would clamp a cigar between his teeth and correct her pronunciation. Nora, deliberately contrary, insisted that hers was the authentic elite way of speaking. Blake let her mess around, laughing as he pinched her cheek. "Don't tell anyone I taught you that. It's embarrassing." Once, Nora suddenly pointed at him and said, "Why did your family give you a name like Blake? It sounds like a knight of the Round Table, or some World War I veteran with a monocle. That's basically like renaming Caleb George Washington." Caleb nearly laughed out loud. He'd heard that Blake's name had been chosen by his superstitious grandmother, meant to honor some distant relative with royal blood, to anchor the family's fortune. Blake himself didn't care about names. You could call him, "Hey, rich guy," and he'd still answer. But when Nora pointed at him and called him an antique knight, Caleb saw something rare. Blake's face darkened, just slightly. Then Blake offered up his middle name, telling Nora that the full name on his passport was Blake Randolph Winslow. Randolph, that was his mother's family name. Older than Winslow, heavier, an even tighter shackle. Caleb could never quite describe the look on Nora's face in that moment. There was a flicker of confusion, as if someone had pushed her from behind without warning. Then she smiled and said, "Randolph? That sounds like the name of a manor's head butler." Later, Caleb thought the ancestor who'd chosen that name had truly done him harm. If there was such a thing as destiny, Blake should have been named something else entirely. Something like Blake the Free, if that could have given him freedom. Rain and snow. When did even that cold-blooded Blake start to change? Caleb thought about it. Probably during that trip to Miami. One night, Nora had a Long Island iced tea. The drink packed a punch. After finishing it, she lowered her head, drowsy, as if sleep had suddenly claimed her. At the time, Blake had stepped out to take a call from a family lawyer. Caleb watched Nora for a long moment. Then Blake pushed the door open. His gaze sharpened instantly, landing on Caleb with a flash of warning. Without a word, he went straight to Nora and lifted her into his arms, protecting her like a one-of-a-kind treasure. In their circle, companions changed all the time. Occasionally there were even those absurd Gossip Girl-style situations where people swapped partners as if it meant nothing. But between Blake and Caleb, that would never happen. Not in this lifetime. Nothing needed to be said. Caleb pulled his thoughts back in and went on with his own fun, as if nothing had crossed his mind at all. In Caleb's eyes, Blake wasn't a good man. If he were, he wouldn't have dragged Nora along for 7 or 8 years, letting her sink deeper and deeper into that nameless swamp. Caleb would test the waters sometimes. He would warn him lightly, but love and hatred are intoxicating, like the purest drug. Once you're high on it, no advice gets through. Once, Caleb tried again, cautiously, telling Blake not to play around until he trapped himself. That kind of thing, he said, could ruin lives. Blake laughed it off. "What's there to be afraid of? I'm not actually going to marry her." Time passed. Too much time. Caleb later couldn't say for sure whether, in that moment, something strange had flickered through his mind. He only remembered that the private room fell silent for a long while before Blake spoke again, his voice low. "What's so good about marrying someone like me anyway, being locked in that gilded cage? What's the point of struggling like that?" Even then, Caleb knew the truth. Blake just hadn't realized yet how deeply he would end up loving Nora, and how much he would regret not locking her inside that cage. New York without Nora. The day Caleb learned that Nora was leaving New York, he boarded the same flight to Los Angeles as she did. They had completely fallen out. Everyone knew it. The tabloids were full of it. Everyone assumed Nora couldn't live without Blake. Only Caleb knew the truth. It wasn't Nora who couldn't let go. It was Blake. Caleb gave her a way out. Cut everything off. Use public opinion. Use Blake's precious dignity to force him to release her. It was the first time Caleb truly betrayed his closest friend. He never regretted it. Someone like Nora, resilient and alive like wild grass. How could anyone bear to see her force down that despised path of a secret mistress? The day Nora cut Blake out of her life completely, Caleb's finger hovered over Blake's private number for a very long time. Then he blocked it. Forget it. He was rotten through and through himself, dirty, compromised. What right did he have to play savior? Later, a major production Nora was meant to shoot on location in New York quietly changed its filming site to Atlanta. Only Caleb knew the reason. Blake had pulled strings. He had even invested hundreds of millions, having the production team build an Atlanta set that perfectly replicated New York streets. Blake changed his mind at the last moment. In the end, he didn't dare see her again. Also, she wouldn't return to New York, so she wouldn't face the rumors that might hurt her. Or perhaps so she wouldn't have to face him. That film, they said later, became one of the defining peaks of Nora's career in Hollywood. It earned her first Oscar statuette and cemented her place at the top. Caleb also heard that every contract she signed afterward carried an unwritten rider. No events, no shoots, nothing in New York. For many, many years, Nora never set foot in New York again. That city, Manhattan, where she and Blake had loved each other for 8 years. She never returned. Extra story 2 Chase. The Protector. When Nora and Chase's new series premiered on Netflix, the internet exploded. Fan wars broke out instantly. Both sides clashing like thunder and fire, neither willing to give an inch. Around that same time, after Nora returned from Finland where she'd gone to see the aurora, she disappeared on a long hiatus. Her Instagram went completely silent. No updates, no sightings. No one knew where she was. Even her studio fell quiet, posting only routine promotional content. Paired with the recent gossip about Mr. Winslow's engagement, speculation online ran wild. Some claimed she'd offended a Wall Street tycoon and been frozen out. Others said she'd been retaliated against and blacklisted by the fiancé. A portion of Chase's more extreme fans seized the moment to stir trouble. They photoshopped defamatory images of Nora and flooded Twitter and TikTok with rumors and insinuations. Chase saw those posts 2 days later. He sat in his trailer, staring at the vicious comments for a long time. Not long after, he posted a tweet from his personal Twitter account. The words were simple, yet powerful enough to send shockwaves through Hollywood. "You don't treat girls like this. And please stop attacking Nora. She is someone I truly care about." Attached were photos, 27 ticket stubs from Here the Summer that he'd collected when he was 16, the first signed photo of Nora he ever received at a premiere, and a blurry behind-the-scenes shot from his stuntman days where he stood in the background behind her. Every image bore the marks of time, but none felt old. It was obvious they had been carefully kept, protected like something precious. In many of his early interviews, Chase had openly said that Nora was the sole reason he wanted to become an actor. At first, people accused him of chasing clout. Later, when he rose to fame and became a box office action star, his PR team imposed strict limits on what he could say, and he never repeated those words publicly again. But his affection was never hidden. He expressed it openly, without shame, unafraid of gossip or backlash. An idol's influence over their fans worked faster than any press release. When guided with intention, fans listened. After that tweet went live, his official fan clubs began steering the conversation responsibly. Many fans went straight to Nora's Instagram to apologize. Chase saw Nora again outside a cafe in Santa Monica. She wore a white cashmere coat, a dark scarf covering half her face, revealing only a pair of eyes bright as stars. She lowered the scarf and smiled at him. "Thank you, Chase." Behind his back, his fingers trembled with nerves. The tips of his ears flushed red as he said, "You're welcome." Nora laughed softly, a smile so light it felt like it might dissolve into the Pacific breeze. She looked like a goddess who had endured centuries of hardship, returning to the world scarred yet radiant. "Only you." Chase's family was based in San Francisco. His ancestors had started in security during the gold rush, later expanding into a major security firm and tech investments. His mother was his father's second wife. The two were deeply in love and widely known as a philanthropic power couple. When Chase first floated the idea of marrying Nora, his mother stopped him. "You need to think carefully, Chase," she said. "You're a man. You must take responsibility for every promise you make." Nora was badly hurt in a deeply unequal relationship once. If you can't promise that she'll be the only one for the rest of your life, if there's any chance you might hurt her again, then you need to reconsider. She's someone who can't survive another heartbreak. I'm saying this because I'm a woman. I hope you truly think it through. Chase did think it through. And he knew this lifetime there would never be anyone but Nora. Not even in death. He came later through one of those rare Los Angeles downpours, soaked head to toe, standing at her door like a stray dog abandoned on Sunset Boulevard. He knocked, breathless and dripping, and said to Nora, "Choose me. At least try me. You won't regret it." Nora stayed fully guarded, like a startled cat with no sense of safety left. "I'm not suited for long-term relationships," she said quietly. "And I'm not right for you either, Chase." He rushed his words, afraid she would shut the door. "We don't have to date. We can sign a prenup first, then talk about dating. Any condition you want. I'll agree to all of it." Chase stayed by her side for years, circling patiently, swatting away one wave after another of Hollywood's bad romances like flies. Those years, he poured every ounce of care he had into slowly piecing Nora back together, fragment by fragment. Only after they were together did he learn that for several years, Nora had survived on antidepressants, Prozac, and sleeping pills. Between them, the past was never discussed. What came before was never revisited. Chase knew she carried an indelible memory. In years he had never touched, a man with Empire State level power had given her both unimaginable splendor and an equally profound pain. He couldn't probe it. He couldn't think too deeply about it. He would feel jealous, envious, even irrational at times. But thankfully, they still had a future. A great deal of time ahead. A crown of gold and laurel. When Nora gave birth to their younger daughter, Susie, Chase stood outside the delivery room with red, swollen eyes. Tears fell one by one, like a boy who had never quite grown up. Neither his mother nor his mother-in-law could comfort him. His usually stern father rubbed the ring on his finger, remembering how helpless he himself had looked when this idiot son was born, and, rarely, didn't roll his eyes. When Susie was 3 months old, Chase accepted a global endorsement from a top luxury brand and flew to Europe for a shoot. Only later did Nora find out the truth. Because she'd once said she didn't want any more children, Chase had secretly flown alone to Zurich and undergone a vasectomy. Nora had been playing with a plush toy to make Susie laugh when she heard. Her gaze slowed, softened. Somewhere deep inside her, a place that had been withered for years quietly filled with new shoots. Nora's first project after returning to work won her the Golden Globe for Best Actress that year. When she stood under the spotlight to accept the award, she looked out toward the audience. Her husband and daughter were there, along with her 2 mothers. On camera, Nora smiled, her eyes filled with gentleness and light. A love that had wandered for half a lifetime had finally found its way out. Extra Story 3, Blake. The man named Randolph. Blake and Vanessa's marriage lasted only 2 years. Vanessa was proud to the bone, a textbook Upper East Side heiress. Only after marriage did she realize she wasn't nearly as indifferent to who he loved as she'd claimed. She couldn't stand Blake's courteous distance or his complete emotional neglect. She took a lover outside the marriage. When it ended, years of resentment erupted all at once. "Blake, you're pathetic," she spat. "If it weren't me, it would be someone else. You'll never live for yourself in this lifetime." Later, he was in a car accident and remained unconscious for a long time. On the day he woke up, Vanessa stood by the hospital bed and mocked him. "Want me to call her over, so she can see how devoted you look?" He lifted his eyelids slightly and replied with cool indifference. "It was an accident. The road was slippery." In those years, he deliberately shut out all outside information, including Nora's grand, widely celebrated wedding. Among their circle, not a single marriage was truly happy. Caleb, too, married a woman of equal standing, and that never stopped him from indulging himself recklessly outside the marriage. For a long time, Blake refused to admit one simple truth. Without him, Nora would have better choices. Without her, he would not. Sometimes Blake looked back on those 8 years with Nora and realized they had truly consumed all the vitality he would ever have in his life. He still remembered the year she learned his full name was Blake Randolph Winslow. And yet, not once, not a single time, did she ever call him by that middle name. She only ever called him Blake. Blake, I like you so much. Blake, what are you doing? Blake, you're so boring. In his entire life, he had only been Blake for 8 years. And perhaps he had only truly lived during those 8 years. All the remaining years, he was merely a symbol burdened with the names Randolph and Winslow. A man who had never been loved, and who had never truly possessed Nora, Mr. Winslow. Familiar eyes. That year, he attended a Los Angeles charity gala he would normally never have gone to. Something compelled him to show up. It was a gathering of elites, people spaced far apart from one another. He stood in an inconspicuous corner, holding a glass of soda. Just as boredom set in, a small hand tugged gently at his tailored pant leg. He looked down. A little girl was gazing up at him, obedient and sweet. "Uncle, do you know how to get to the garden? I got separated from my mommy." She wore a pale yellow custom-made dress. Her features were delicate, her small face round and fair, black hair braided into 2 neat plaits. Her eyes, large and brilliant, were exactly like her mother's. She looked like a miniature Nora. He'd heard she was born in San Francisco. If she were his child Blake's, she would have been born in New York, attended the best private schools from childhood, spoken flawless Upper East Side English. He would have laid the entire world at her feet. The fingers in his pocket trembled uncontrollably. For a brief moment he nearly cried. During the years he and Nora were together, they rarely spoke of marriage. As for children, it was never mentioned. It was taboo. He only remembered one moment, during a trip to Italy, when the hostess of their guest house looked at them in awe and exclaimed, "Mamma mia, you too. If you ever have a child, they'd be so beautiful." That time, Nora looked at him and smiled, her eyes curved with warmth. He smiled back, but said nothing. Thinking of it now felt like being pierced by countless arrows of regret. Blake crouched slightly and extended his hand with a gentleness that hardly sounded like his own. "The garden isn't this way. I'll take you." She hesitated, clearly taught by family not to follow strangers. After a moment, she blinked and placed her small hand in his palm. Blake led her around 2 red-carpeted corners. When they arrived, he stopped and stared ahead for a long moment. In the distance, an elegant woman stood with a worried expression, phone pressed to her ear. Blake watched her quietly. It had been so many years. The girl who once looked up at him and smiled had grown into this woman, tempered by time, softened by love. He knelt down, gently patted the child's head, took one last look, and pointed. "Your mommy's over there. Go on." The girl's eyes lit up. She waved happily. "Thank you, Uncle. Bye-bye." Just as Nora was panicking, a small bundle came running toward her and hugged her legs. "Mommy, I couldn't find you. I missed you so much." Nora took her hand, checked her over from head to toe, and finally relaxed, reminding her not to run off again. Then the little girl suddenly pointed into the distance. Nora looked up. She saw only a figure from behind, wearing a perfectly tailored black suit, walking away into the light. "Mommy, that uncle brought me here," the girl said softly, but he looked really sad. Nora had a faint sense that this was their final encounter in this lifetime. That departing figure might be the true end of everything that had bound them together. "Mommy, why are you crying?" She thought of all those sleepless nights, of the prayers she copied word by word while breaking free from emotional dependence. "God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. If there is another life, if there is another life." End of extras.